What does iron remember when it cools from flame and blood? Is it the hammer's heat or the hands that bled beneath it? Is it the groan of the forge or the groan of a man's throat crushed too tight for breath? In the backwoods of Tennessee, they say there's a tree that sings when the wind passes through it. Not a song, not quite. More like a rattle, like teeth in a dying jaw, like chains clinking against bark. Locals call it the chain tree. Others call it cursed. If you walk there just after a storm, you'll find an old length of rusted iron hanging from a low branch, bent in places, wrapped with moss and shaped like something once living. The chain doesn't sway unless it wants to. And when it does, it makes a sound no one forgets. They say it belonged to a man named David. Not David the field hand. Not David the boy sold at auction. No, by the time folks remembered his name, he was something more, something sharpened. His name is spoken in silence now because that's how he moved. That's how he endured. He never yelled when the whip cracked, never begged when the blood ran. Some said he was born mute. Others said he was born patient. But every man who ever raised a hand to him remembered his eyes deep still, like a well with no bottom. Stories differ on what he did the night the master vanished. Some say he walked into the woods and became part of the land. Others say he was taken by the devil. But old folks, the ones who still remember the year 1844, they whisper something else, that the chains used to beat David were found wrapped around another man's neck, that they'd been pulled so tight, not even God could have pried them loose. And that ever since, the wind won't blow through that tree without stopping to listen first. What does iron remember? Whatever it is, it still sings before the sun knew the sky. David was already moving. The horn blew before dawn, as it did every day, cutting through the mist like a blade. The quarters stirred with the sound of sore feet sliding across dirt, knees popping, prayers muttered into torn sleeves. But David never prayed aloud. He rose in silence, heavy with sleep that never seemed to soften the ache in his bones. They called him boy, though he was a man. A towering one, shoulders like split logs, hands thick with scar tissue, and skin the color of river clay darkened by shadow. But to them he had no age, no past, no face, only muscle and obedience. The chains were everywhere, around wrists, around ankles, hanging from nails on barn walls like forgotten tools, not just to bind but to remind. The metallic clink was a language of ownership. The overseers spoke it fluently. Each morning, lashes greeted the late or the slow. Some overseers whipped out of rhythm as if bored just to hear someone cry out. But David never did. Even when they struck him, and they did, often his back bore the punishment without a sound. It was his silence that made them uneasy. Others cowered or wept, but David stared, not defiant, not defeated, just still. Like he was somewhere far off, inside a place they couldn't reach with fists or fire. They beat him harder for it, whipped him longer, called him devil-hearted. But he only blinked when the blood ran down his spine. The worst of it happened under the punishment tree, an old hickory near the shed, its trunk scarred from years of lashes. David had been tied there once for 4 straight hours, accused of stealing tobacco he hadn't touched. The bark soaked up his blood, turned dark and slick. They left him hanging limp until flies circled his head like a crown. He did not scream, not once. And that, more than anything, haunted them. David didn't speak, but it wasn't fear that kept his tongue behind his teeth. It was colder than fear, quieter. A silence that had grown teeth, the kind of silence that waits. The day was hot enough to peel bark from trees. David had been working in the blacksmith lean-to, hauling buckets of water for quenching iron, when he saw young Jeremiah, no older than 9, fumble a heavy pair of tongs. They clattered onto the ground, striking a pile of unfinished nails. The overseer heard the noise and came running. "Who dropped it?" he barked. No one answered. The boy trembled, hands behind his back, eyes full of terror. David stood near him, sweat soaking his shirt, face unreadable. The overseer pointed. "You. Boy, you saw who did it." David looked him in the eye, said nothing. Silence fell thick. Jeremiah began to cry. The overseer reported it to Master Colburn that evening, twisting the tale just enough. "David's covering for someone. He thinks he's above discipline now." That was all it took. Colburn ordered a lesson. They dragged David to the shed, a place the enslaved called the chain room. It wasn't a room so much as a stall, boarded on three sides with iron hooks in the walls and old farm tools rusting in corners. But its name came from the heap of rusted chains piled in a wooden box, the kind used on ankles, necks, and backs. Colburn wanted it public. The slaves were made to stand outside and listen. A few were forced to watch. The chains didn't whip like leather, they cracked like thunder, metal on bone, metal on skin, over and over. David was silent for the first 10 strikes. By the 20th, his shirt had split. By the 40th, blood ran down his ribs. Somewhere past that, he dropped to his knees. A jagged link embedded itself into the muscle of his shoulder. They left it there. The others turned their eyes away. Even the overseer looked uneasy by the end, the chain slick with blood, hands trembling as he dropped it. David was carried back to the quarters that night. No one spoke. He didn't sleep. He lay on the straw, eyes wide open, staring at the beams of the ceiling as night insects chirped in the dark. When the fireflies flickered past the window, he whispered his first word in years. Enough. David returned to work the next morning. Bruised ribs, torn flesh, rusted iron still embedded just beneath the skin of his shoulder, but he walked without help. Slower now, a little bent, but not broken, not bowed. His silence stretched like wire pulled taut, humming just beneath the surface. The other slaves watched him from the corners of their eyes. Some pitied him, some feared him. Most assumed the beating had shattered something deep inside him, but they were wrong. He was not splintered. He was sharpening. David started observing things no one else cared to notice. The way Master Colburn always left his door ajar on hot days. How the ring of keys on his belt jingled with a missing note, one key lost, never replaced, which windows had cracked glass, which steps creaked under weight. He noted the patterns of boots in the dirt. The way the master's voice changed when he drank. How the lantern oil smelled stronger on Thursdays, meaning someone restocked then. To the overseers, David looked vacant, moving through labor like a ghost. But inside, a clock had started ticking. Sometimes, after the sun fell and the tools were put away, he would return to the shed. There, in the half-dark, he would sit before the box of chains. He touched them gently, like old friends, ran his thumb over the links that had tasted his blood, cleaned them with oil and cloth when no one looked, not to worship, but to prepare. He polished each one with quiet reverence, the way a priest might prepare sacred objects before a funeral. The iron, once rough, began to gleam faintly in moonlight, sharpness where rust had been. Even the master's hound, a wide-jawed beast named Barlow, began acting strange. The dog once barked at every slave who passed the main house. But now, when David drew near, Barlow fell silent, tail low, ears back. He wouldn't meet David's eyes. No one did, not for long, because David's gaze had changed. There was no anger in it, no pain, no fear, just stillness. Eyes like still water, so calm on the surface, you'd never see the weight pulling from beneath something shifted in the air. The kind of stillness that settles before lightning splits a tree. Even the birds felt it, once constant in the rafters of the barn, now gone without a feather left behind. Chickens refused to roost. Horses grew wild-eyed when the wind passed through the trees. One night, the overseer's daughter, no more than 7, woke up screaming. She babbled to her nursemaid about a man made of rust standing in the doorway, dripping black water onto the floor. No one believed her, but they kept a lantern lit in her room after that. And David, he walked quieter than ever. The other slaves began whispering that they never heard his footsteps anymore. He would be there, lifting sacks, cutting timber, sweeping embers, but not a soul could say they heard him arrive. One woman swore she saw him standing in the field before dawn, unmoving, just watching the house. When she blinked, he was gone. Colburn noticed too, not the man, but the things, tools missing from the shed, chain lengths coming up short. One morning, the door to the stable was unlatched, though he'd bolted it himself the night before. Another day, he found his riding crop half buried in the ash pit. He blamed the others, beat 2 men to the ground in a rage, screamed that they were testing him, called for tighter control, more lashes, fewer rations, but his voice cracked when he shouted now, and his hands trembled as he gripped his belt. Then came the mud. It was a dry night, crickets loud, sky clear, not a cloud for miles. But Colburn awoke just past midnight with a chill in his spine. He lit the lamp and swung his legs out of bed. His boots were filled to the brim with river mud. Thick, black, and cold, he stared at them for a long time. There had been no storm, no footprints on the floor. The mud hadn't come from the yard. It was the kind found near the deep bend in the river where the ground stank like rotting reeds and iron. Colburn said nothing. But that night he locked his door for the first time in years, and still he did not sleep before the chains, before the shed, before the silence. There were his mother's hands. David remembered them clearly, even now strong, wide-knuckled, calloused from grinding corn and lifting babies not her own. He had once thought them unbreakable. He was no more than 7 when he watched her stripped and tied to the porch post, her crime, singing a hymn too softly while hanging laundry. The master wanted livelier songs, nothing mournful. The whip didn't just tear flesh that day, it drew artless, crisscrossed patterns down her back, raised ribbons of pain, turning her skin into a canvas of cruelty. Afterward, as she lay in the dirt, David crawled beside her. Her voice was hoarse, lips cracked, but she managed a whisper. "Chains can bind bodies, baby," she murmured, "but not roots. We got roots deeper than they know." She died a season later. Fever, they said, but David always believed it was something quieter that took her, grief that settled in the lungs and never left. He had never sung again, but he remembered everything. Especially the months that followed when he was sent to live with old Cyrus, a freed black man who worked as a metalsmith on the edge of town. Cyrus had been paid to teach David how to stoke fire, pump the bellows, and lift hammers heavy as judgment. He wasn't kind, but he was fair, and he taught with his hands. "How metal moves," Cyrus used to say, "ain't about strength, it's about listening." David listened. He learned to feel for weakness in the iron spine, learned how a single bent link could unmake a chain, how to ease a shackle open without noise, how to snap a lock if you knew where its throat sat. Then he was sold south. He never saw Cyrus again, but the lessons traveled with him like root memory, like blood knowledge. And now, all these years later, he remembered them with perfect clarity. Each night, alone by lantern glow, David practiced with a short length of chain beneath his cot, twisting, separating, rebinding, smooth as breath. The overseers thought they'd taken everything from him, but they'd forgotten about his mother's hands. And the man who taught him what iron feared David moved through the night like fog, seen only when he wished, felt only when it was too late. While others slept in exhaustion, he collected. A snapped shackle left near the pig pen, a rusted lock half buried in the ash pile. 3 empty lanterns he drained carefully, preserving the oil like a sacred ritual. He worked without sound, each motion precise. A dropped nail might mean a death. A single footstep out of place could spark suspicion. But David had mastered silence the way others mastered prayer. One by one, he found the tools used against them and unmade them, the punishment tree's iron cuffs. He filed the hinges from the inside so they'd snap under pressure, the whip hooks in the shed, removed and rehung with rotted rope, the blood box of chains reorganized, not missing, just rearranged, enough to unsettle. And in Colburn's study, the heart of the poison, David prepared his altar. The master often sat in a wide wooden chair near the hearth, brandy in hand, boots off, talking to himself about harvests and bloodlines. Beneath that chair, hidden in the shadows of rugs and firelight, David attached a length of polished chain. The hook he installed just beneath the floorboard was taken from the blacksmith shed, bent and reshaped to bite. No one noticed. Not the overseers, not the dog. Especially not Colburn, who had grown drunker by the week, blaming ghosts for his failing crops and shadows for his sleeplessness. David waited. And then came the night. A warm, swollen evening in late August, thick with cicadas and rot. The quarters buzzed with uneasy murmurs. Master Colburn was hosting a private celebration, 20 years of ownership, he called it, like a wedding anniversary with shackles instead of rings. He drank alone by the fire, his finest boots polished, coat slung over the chair, chains of gold around his neck. The bottle emptied faster than his thoughts. He didn't notice the chain coiled beneath him like a patient serpent. Didn't feel the oil on the chair legs. Didn't hear the click of a lock being tested in the dark beyond the window. But David was there, watching, waiting, not with rage, not with fear, but with purpose. Because finally, after years of silence, he had remembered what iron was made for. The cabin stank of liquor and sweat. A single lantern flickered near the hearth, casting warped shadows along the log walls. Master Colburn sat slouched in his chair, legs sprawled, shirt half open, a silver flask slipping between his fingers. The door creaked open. David stepped inside. Colburn squinted, then grinned. "Boy," he slurred, raising the flask in a mock toast. "Come to polish my boots, have you? Or maybe fetch the piss pot like a good beast." David said nothing. He stepped closer, boots silent on the wood. His shadow passed the fire like smoke, long and slow. In his hands the chain gleamed, oiled, cleaned, coiled like a question waiting for its answer. Colburn chuckled, throat dry and cracked. "What cat got your tongue? Or did that whipping finally knock the voice out of you for good?" Still, no answer. Then, with terrifying precision, David moved. He slipped behind the chair in a single breathless motion. The chain dropped over Colburn's head before the master could blink. A quick jerk, and it bit into his neck like iron teeth. The drunken smile vanished. Colburn's hands flew up, clawing, wheezing. But David had braced himself. He locked the chain tight and pulled, slow and steady, as if drawing a plow through thick red clay. The master's legs kicked wildly. His face swelled red, then purple. He thrashed against the chair, knocking the flask to the floor, the firelight dancing mad. David leaned in. His face remained calm, eyes unblinking, watching. He never spoke, never trembled. His hands were steady as stone. He pulled until the sound of struggle gave way to stillness, until the kicking stopped, until the chain no longer groaned against resistance. Colburn's eyes rolled back. The silence was complete. David released the chain. The master slumped forward, head tilted like a rag doll, the iron wrapped tight around his neck like a final collar. Then, without hurry, David dragged the body across the floor, over the threshold, through the dirt path, past the punishment tree that still bore the stains of old blood. The moon was high when he reached the river. The same chain that once tore his back now dragged the master's corpse to its edge. And when the water closed over it all, not even a ripple remained. Dawn broke with a heavy hush, as if the earth itself held its breath. The cabin door swung open in the breeze, creaking gently on tired hinges. Inside, the fire had burned to ash. The master's chair was toppled. The flask lay cracked on the floorboards, its contents soaked into the rug like a final confession. But Colburn was gone. No boot prints, no blood trail, no broken glass or signs of struggle, just absence. The house was empty. Word spread through the quarters before the rooster crowed, eyes darted, feet stilled mid-step. No one said his name, but all mouths formed the same unspoken question: where is David? No one had seen him, not in the fields, not near the shed, not at the well. He had vanished as quietly as he had lived. The overseers searched half-heartedly at first. They kicked open doors, shouted threats, lashed two men for withholding truth, but their voices held less thunder than before. By midday, one had packed his satchel and disappeared down the road. By the end of the week, 3 more followed. The crops withered in the fields. The cotton balls never opened. The plows sat rusting. The livestock began to act strange, refusing to eat, gathering near the fences as if waiting for something to pass by. Then someone found the chains, coiled neatly at the foot of Colburn's bed, not bloodied, not broken, just resting. The same chain that once lived in the shed, used to bend backs and silence cries, now still, cold, rust creeping in like time reclaiming what cruelty had built. Some say the chain rattled that morning, even though no wind blew. Others say the chain didn't move, but the shadows near it did. In the weeks that followed, the plantation fell quiet. No orders barked, no boots stomped. The master's name was never spoken again. His portrait was taken down, his ledger burned in the hearth, and David, no one ever saw him again. Some believe he ran north. Others claim he walked into the river and became part of it. But a few, especially the old ones, whisper something else. That freedom didn't come in letters or declarations. It came in silence. The kind that chokes, the kind that listens, the kind that remembers the plantation is long gone now. Where fields once stretched like punishment across the land, only tall grass grows, wild and unplowed. The main house collapsed decades ago, reclaimed by vines and rot. Nothing stands except for the willow by the river, the one locals call the chain tree. It leans crooked near the water's edge, branches trailing low like reaching arms. Most pass it by without looking. But on humid nights when the air is thick and the sky hangs low, something happens. The wind stills, and the chain sings, not loudly, not like bells or whistles, just a faint clink, a metallic whisper carried on still air. Some say it sounds like breathing. Others say it sounds like warning. Wrapped around the lowest branch is a single length of rusted iron looped into a perfect circle, like a crown. It's been there longer than anyone remembers. Some say it grew with the tree. Others claim it was placed there by hands that bled. Children dare each other to touch it. They never do. They run screaming instead, hearts pounding, claiming they felt it hum beneath their fingers or worse, that it moved. One boy swore it turned toward him like a watching eye. He doesn't speak much now. Fishermen tell stories too. Of nights when their boats drift near the bend and they see a figure on the bank. A tall man, broad-shouldered, facing the water, never moving, no lantern, no sound, and no shadow beneath his feet. By the time they call out, he's gone. Old folks in town keep a respectful silence about the place. Some still leave bread at the tree's roots on the anniversary of the master's disappearance, though none say why. They speak in riddles when asked. One old woman, blind since childhood, once said, "He ain't gone, he's just waitin', not for revenge. For remembering." And on certain nights, especially midsummer when the crickets go silent and even the frogs won't croak, the chain hums louder. But once, not long ago, the wind changed. It rushed through the trees in a long, low howl, and just as it touched the chain tree, it stopped, abruptly, as if caught by a grip stronger than nature. Silence followed, not peaceful, heavy, and then the faintest echo of a man's breath, deep, steady, the kind of breath taken before something is done. They tried to silence him with chains, but some chains, once awakened, learned to speak. What do you think the ancestors would say about a man who turned his chains into justice? If this story stirred something in your spirit, if it reminded you that silence can be power and memory can be rebellion, then honor David by keeping his name alive. Tap that subscribe button to hear more stories that were never told in school but were felt in the blood. Because we don't just tell history, we remember the voices they tried to bury.